Good morning, Friendship United Methodist Church. I'd like to welcome you on this 26th day of July 2026. The theologian of the comic strips, Charlie Brown, was once talking with his friend Lucy about the meaning of life. And Lucy asked Charlie Brown, "Do you think life has any meaning?" And Charlie Brown starts to answer, but as usual, he is interrupted by Lucy. And she says, do you think life has any meaning after you have failed 9 spelling tests in a row and your teacher hates you? Charlie Brown looks up and he calmly says, "Now that's a different question." I was reading recently about the origin of the word sabotage, and it comes from French, where a sabot is a shoe, a wooden shoe. And it used to be that when workers in a French shoe factory were unhappy, they would throw a sabot into the working machinery, thus sabotaging the equipment. And I know there are times in my life when I feel like a wooden shoe has been thrown into the machinery of life for me. And on those days, I sympathize a lot. I sympathize a lot with a sign that reads something like this: "When the day is over, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. I have earned it. I deserve it, and no one is going to deprive me of it." Oh my goodness. But we've all had days like that, haven't we, Joan? Yeah. Even St. Paul had days like that, and yet he could write words like, "I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is being revealed in us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God." Now, that doesn't sound like a man that's ready to give up, does it, John? No. That sounds to me like a man who has learned to deal with hard times. There was a best-selling book that came out several years ago by Robert Schuller, and it was called "Tough Times Never Last. Tough People Do." And the introduction to that book is easily worth the cost of the book itself. In it, Schuller describes his own boyhood days during the worst of the Depression. Big drought in the 30s as well during the worst of that depression, and he was on his farm there in Iowa, his dad's farm. And if you think you're having a tough time right now, you should probably read that introduction. At the close of his recitation of life's hardships, Schuller gives this mighty affirmation: "Tough times never last. Tough people do." And that begs the question, how can we deal with life's hardships? That's our question for the day. Chew on it, ponder it. But may I suggest a very simple formula for that, and one that really works? I just want to remind you of some very familiar words that are always important when the going gets tough. The first is, this is a tough one too. The first is patience. Patience. "Lord, give me patience and give it to me right now." Yeah. How many have said that? Yeah, we thought that even if you didn't say it, haven't you? We've all prayed that prayer, haven't we? This is yes, this is no. But we may need patience more than we realize. In a taped sermon called Growing Through Waiting, Pastor Chuck Swindoll made a survey of the Bible's waiters. Noah, anyone remember Noah? What did he do? Built the ark, right? Yeah. Noah waited 120 years before it rained. Wow. Job waited 60 to 70 years. Abraham waited 100 years to find a city, and he never did. Joseph served 14 years of imprisonment because of false accusations. Moses waited 40 years in the desert. Can you imagine waiting 40 years or more for a particular event to happen? And we'd be pulling our hair out, wouldn't we? And these are just a few of the Bible's many waiters. Patience is probably the hardest virtue for most modern Christians to acquire. We are taught that faith will remove all obstacles, and we expect them to be removed immediately, don't we? Boom, bam. But sometimes, oftentimes, God's timetable, have you noticed that? It's not our timetable. And that's a hard lesson for us to learn. We are too often like Clarence Day's father in his book, God and My Father. And Day says to his father, in moments of prayer, when he and God tried to commune with each other, it wasn't until his own shortcomings that were brought on the carpet. It wasn't his own. It was God's. That's what Day said about his father. He expected a great deal from God. And it seemed that God spoiled his plans time and time again, and that aroused his wrath. He wanted it now. He would call to God's attention to such things. Now, he didn't actually accuse God of gross inefficiency, but when he prayed, his tone was loud and angry, like that of a dissatisfied guest in a rundown hotel. How hard is it for us to have patience with God, or with our spouse, our children, or with life in general? And yet, friends, we must have patience. For there will be times in our lives when we will be at the end of the rope, and all we can do is tie a knot in it and hold on. Successful people learn early to be patient. Did you know that it took Christopher Columbus, 14 years to find a backer for his proposed voyage around the world? 14 years. Did you know that when Alexander Graham Bell offered his telephone for sale, it was turned down because people could see no good use in it, no need for it? The photocopier has revolutionized office work, but the process was known for 4 years before anybody had enough confidence in it to put up the money to get it on the market. The first rule that we must follow when going gets tough is patience. And the second one is very similar. It is persistence. Thomas Edison once boasted that he started where the last man had left off. And in his search for an electric light, Edison constructed 3,000 different gadgets, each of them theoretically reasonable and apparently likely to be good. Yet in only 2 of these 3,000 cases did his experiments pay off and lead to patents. He once said he would do anything to solve a technical problem, even eat Limburger cheese. Charles F. Kettering marked that to develop a new diesel engine, he tried one thing after another for about 6 years until he finally found the answer. Artist and cartoonists usually draw many initial sketches before they pursue a finished product. Van Gogh, anyone heard the name Van Gogh, the artist? Van Gogh drew repeatedly until there was one drawing that was different from all the rest, one which didn't look like an ordinary drawing. The Pacific Telephone and Telegraph Company once made 25 studio takes of a 7.5 second recording which it planned to use on one of its recorded messages. They wanted the tape to project warmth and authority, every syllable planned. The person recorded was a professional speaker and a member of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. Yet, because the message recorded was so important and would be heard by up to 2 million people daily, 25 takes were made before the best one was selected. So you can see from these three examples, these few examples, that a half-hearted effort will not make it in today's world. Whether you are talking about the marketplace or you're talking about home, it doesn't matter. American industries and American homes have learned a hard lesson over the past few decades. You can't take success for granted. When the going gets tough, it takes patience and persistence to get going. And even more importantly, it takes perspective. That was the advantage St. Paul had. He could deal with things like shipwrecks and beatings and humiliation and imprisonment because he believed that deprivation, by those deprivations he was experiencing, then they were not compared to the glory that would one day be bestowed upon him and upon those who are faithful in serving Jesus Christ. What a difference a proper perspective makes. Now, you may be familiar with the story of a little boy whose life was made miserable by a bully who constantly pushed him around and picked on him. And one day this little boy was sitting in the living room with a new telescope that his father had bought him, but he was looking at the large end of it. And the father came in and told him that he needed to use the other end of the telescope so that things would look bigger. But I'm looking at Harry, said the boy, and I don't want him to look any bigger. This way he looks small, and I'm not afraid of him. Yeah. Wouldn't it be great to have a telescope that we could turn to every time we faced a problem? Boom, smaller, so that we could make those problems, pretty much non-existent. But we usually do the exact opposite, don't we? Because of our anxiety, we turn mountains or molehills into mountains. Therefore, we need to stop every once in a while and get our lives back into the proper perspective. And what is it that is really important to us? Just how big is that mountain we're facing? Really, how big is it? If we ask ourselves these questions and are honest about the answers, I would be willing to bet that a lot of our problems aren't as big as we think they are. Patience, persistence, perspective, and there's another one, prayer. Yeah, it's prayer that helps us find the proper perspective. We're often like the old bear I heard about out west. A party of hunters were suddenly called away from their camp and leaving a boiling kettle on the fire. An old bear crept out of the woods, saw that kettle with the fire and the lid dancing on it, and he grabbed it. Naturally, it burned him. It was hot. But instead of dropping it, he followed his instincts and hugged it tighter, because this was his only idea of defense. So the tighter he hugged it, the more it burned him. And the more it burned him, the tighter he hugged it. Now, I have no idea how you might get a frightened bear to let go of a boiling tea kettle. And to tell you the truth, I don't know how we can get rid of a lot of our fears and frustrations when life gets tough, except through prayer. Ask God for the patience, the persistence, and the perspective that you need. Patience, persistence, perspective, and prayer. Wow. And really, there's still one more. And although it's a little bit indelicate, but it's perspiration. Sometimes a key to life is simply to keep working. Now, that's not very good news for a lot of us here today, is it? Too many of us can probably identify with the story of a company president who was addressing her employees. And I know you've all heard that we're going to be automated, she said, and you're worried that these robots will take over your jobs. Well, I'm happy to tell you that not one of you will be laid off. Not one of you. But you will be required to come to work one day a week for a full week's pay. Wow. That's right. Hey, that's good. You'll only have to work on Wednesdays. And a voice in the back piped up. You mean every Wednesday? Every Wednesday? Are you crazy? Now, I've known a lot of people with that kind of attitude towards work. And yet, when the going gets tough, if you will just keep on doing what needs to be done, you can usually get through your problems. Niels Ferrer was a great scholar. He wrote some marvelous books. And in one of those books, he tells about a dream his wife had, which gave him his philosophy to worrying. She was sitting at the table with pen and paper, and she had been given the task of writing down the answer to the question, how can I quit worrying? And in her dream, she wrote at great length, but when she stood up, woke up, got her feet under, she could only remember the words of her outline. And they were worship, work, and wait. That's a pretty good formula. Worship, work, and wait. The going gets tough for us at times, friends. I know that. All of us. Yet our lives are easy compared to St. Paul's. And he never lost his enthusiasm or his zeal. A great faith allowed him to keep going and be victorious over the obstacles that confronted him. Patience, persistence, perspective, prayer, perspiration, worship, work, and wait. Worship, work, and wait. Just keep hanging in there. That's the good news I have for you today. Keep hanging in there. Keep in mind the promise that sustained St. Paul, and it's a promise for us, friends. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. God bless. Amen.